Ruben Schwartz here from Sales for Nerds, kicking off the Sales for Nerds podcast. If you feel more comfortable with SQL than sales calls, more at home writing test suites than proposals, more interested in crunching numbers than shaking hands, if you think networking should be about routers rather than cocktails with strangers, if you're more interested in debating code editors than negotiating deals, but somehow you ended up responsible for some of those sales and marketing activities, this is the podcast for you. All right, welcome. Today I'm lucky to have with me Ash Maurya, who's the author of Running Lean, How to Iterate from Plan A to a Plan That Works, and more recently, Scaling Lean, Master the Key Metrics for Startup Growth. And you may have seen Ash in Inc., Forbes, or Fortune. He also regularly hosts workshops and serves as a mentor to accelerators including Techstars, Mars, Capital Factory, and he also does guest lecturing at places like MIT and Harvard and UT. And I'm sitting down here with Ash at his office in Austin, Texas. Ash, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben. Pleasure to be on.
And Ash had requested some California Pinot, which as it happens is kind of my default go-to. So we're going to try this W.H. Smith Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir from 2012. So some nice glasses here. I know I'm doing something right when I show up and there's wine glasses right. So here you go. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
I think it needs a little time. I should have brought that aerator. Anyway, for folks who are not familiar with Lean Startup, what is the quick introduction to Lean?
Yeah, so the definition that I go by is that it's a process by which you systematically de-risk your idea, starting with high risk to low risk. So if I kind of even shorten that even more, it's all about maximizing the amount of stuff you learn about whether your idea is going to work or not in the shortest amount of time possible.
So that sounds really good. Can you give an example to make that concrete?
Yeah, so since we're in Austin, we'll just start with restaurants and food. And that will just kind of should ring a bell. So if you were going to start a restaurant, like a lot of entrepreneurs, you might think, oh, I need to go and find the right location. I need to go and figure out what I'm going to cook. Fast forward to the food truck. If you instead just start a food truck, you could test all those things a lot quicker than the traditional approach, which is let me go get investment, let me go and create a plan, do all those other things. So if you think about it from the riskiest assumption with food, it fundamentally is about who is going to be your clientele, who's your customer, what are they buying today, and how do you kind of differentiate, how do you kind of stand out. And with Lean, we really want to speed up the testing of that piece.
So instead of investing $1 million and renovating a building and then figuring out if the restaurant's going to work, I can buy a trailer for $5,000 and cook some food and try it out.
Yeah, so even better, I think there are companies that will rent you trailers. You don't even have to buy them anymore. The city of Austin will give you a trailer park and you probably pay like a monthly rent, but you go there and there's steady traffic. So it's almost like buying a Facebook ad. You just drive this trailer in there and start cooking away. You can change your menu every single day till you get something that works. And you can test pricing, you test monetization, and get all this feedback very quickly.
So that makes a lot of sense. But I'm assuming that I can apply this outside of the restaurant industry as well.
Absolutely. So I use that because that's just the fastest example to get it out. But this concept came out of the startup world, heavily influenced by lean thinking, which goes back to Toyota. But in more recent years, it's been applied in many different domains. So we can go and show similar examples in fintech or biotech or enterprise, even hardware. So if you look at Tesla, that's my other extreme story. Elon Musk, really big vision, build an all-affordable electric car, but he doesn't start by building his own car. He licenses someone else's car, takes out the combustion engine and puts a battery in there, and that's their car. And that's a fast way of getting to market, but the more important thing is it tests what Tesla is really about, which is building an all-electric car, which is all about the battery. So they're really building a battery, not a car, initially, and that's what they want to test first, like the food truck. And once they can solve for that, then they go and do all the other company building things like factories and hire automotive engineers, do all the things they've done since then.
So you're saying for a sort of a typical tech startup, you don't have to go raise $5 million and make sure everyone has air on chairs and all the other stuff that people kind of got caught up in from time to time.
Yeah.
How would we start out with a tech company starting to prove this out?
So can you give me some more context? Like, you want to say, is it software? Is it?
I don't know. Let's suppose that we have this notion that we're going to we're going to be the Uber for cats or whatever it is.
Yeah. So let's take Uber for maybe pet sitting or
sure.
So let's say pet sitting. So the process there would be, let's figure out how people get this job done today. So what are they really doing today around pet sitting? So what are all the options out there? And then where might be kind of room for us to introduce a solution that's better? Where's room for innovation? So some of that can be done through observation. You go and study how people are doing this. But oftentimes you have to go deliberately out of your way and interview people. But that's a learning phase. So that's where you're really trying to understand where are the problems. And once you identify the problems, you then have to formulate some solutions and go test them. And that's where in the lean startup kind of bag of tricks, there are many shortcuts for testing. So that's the example of Tesla taking somebody else's car would be what we call a Wizard of Oz MVP. So it looks like Tesla built this car in no time, but they didn't. They kind of licensed someone else's car. So if you were doing a pet sitting service, you'd want to figure out what are the problems? Is it that people, when you say Uber for pet sitting, you already have a solution in mind. I'm going to push a button.
Okay,
and
great.
It's a marketplace.
Great point.
Right? And that's fine. But so to share that concept, I would say your challenge should be, let me go and simulate that. So let me go and find people who have pets they want to get, they want to get taken care of. And then let me find the other side of people who provide the service. And let's just do a matchmaking to begin with. And it may be as simple as, SMS this number and we will get you a pet sitter. So it may not be anything elaborate. Uber started out actually that way. And there's a lot of patterns you can see. So Uber didn't start with a fleet of cars. It was the founder and one black limo, which he pretty much had a button on his phone, which was essentially sending an SMS to him. And he showed that to his friends and they're like, wow, that's really cool. I want that too. So I would do something similar. I would try to see how you could, one, simulate the service, but then get it to where you can test whether it works in a small scale manner. And then the whole idea is to scale systematically out from there.
Okay, and I think you said something sort of at the beginning that for you is probably axiomatic at this point, but for a lot of us, especially from the engineering background, may not be, which is go talk to the customers and figure out what their problem is before you build anything and before you assume that you're going to deliver a solution in a certain context. And I think this is something that's a problem because a lot of us, by the time we get to that stage of talking to customers, we've already, if we haven't built something, we've at least conceived of what our awesome, amazing, world-changing solution is going to look like.
Absolutely.
And it's very hard to put that aside and see the customer and what they're trying to do through an unbiased lens.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything we can do, or are we just stuck?
So I've in the last few years, I've actually gone almost around the world, and I've seen this phenomenon you're describing. I call it the entrepreneurial bias or the innovator's bias for the solution. So we get an idea, and we're immediately wired. And even when I asked for a concept, it was
right.
a solution, and that we're just wired for, hey, this would be really cool if we bring this to the world. And the problem with that is that we spend a disproportionate amount of time kind of designing that solution without ever bringing in the customer into the equation. And we even forget about, even when we get stuck because we can't finish it, we then go to the investor and we try to pitch them on the solution. Right. And those are all the things that's a backwards way of building products that I found, because we often, without understanding the problem, we often build things that just don't matter. So the way that you overcome that, I mean, some of it is just recognizing it up front, that the world has changed. So we used to live in a world where you had to go and get all the resources up front because it was very expensive to even go build anything. So
right.
Even to get a software license used to run thousands of dollars. So you couldn't bootstrap that. So you had to go and pitch your idea. And so the business plan, the story, you go and pitch that to an investor, pitch it to your team. And then the story will often change, and that was okay. But we now live in a very different world where we can build almost anything these days. It's the bigger question is not can we build this, but rather should we build this? And so when we think of it that way, you can save a lot of cycles by doing this in the opposite order. So some people will recognize the logic of that and say, I want to go do it. But for most people, myself included, we learned this the hard way.
Yes.
So I've built dozens of products over my early career, and all of them were awesome ideas. Very few of them became awesome products. And at first I was okay with it. I was like, that's par for the course because good ideas are rare, hard to find. You have to search for these ideas. Not everything's going to work. Dismal odds of success, all of that stuff. So I was fine with that until I realized that I was spending about 2 years on every idea. And then I did the math and realized I was not going to magically get younger. I had more ideas than time. So I had to get faster to vet. Okay. So again, I don't think there's any secret sauce for coming up with a good idea, but all this lean techniques that I've been throwing out here are really a faster way to vet whether your idea is good or bad. So it sorts it into the good egg and the bad egg much quicker than you would with a build first or investor first strategy. Because one of the things we do is we don't build anything. So in the beginning, you want to really go and get outside the building, either talk to customers or build this idea of the minimum viable product and test with them.
Right. So
the more important thing is not even asking. So people often say, well, I've tried talking to customers and they've told me things and then they never buy things. And that's another key principle is that it's not so much measuring what customers say, but rather what they either did in the past. So show me evidence that they've had issues with this job or this task you're trying to make better, or something they will do in the future. Right. So even if you can build a very quick prototype, put it in their hands, see that they actually use it, and then you may have something. So that's what jumpstarts the learning and gets you on the right path faster.
Sure. And I think something that it's very easy for me to say to other entrepreneurs, but maybe harder for me to follow in my own life is getting out and talking to customers, I think actually does help you come up with more ideas because you're bouncing off more people and more problems and things are going to percolate a lot faster than if you're sitting on the mountaintop waiting for enlightenment.
Right.
Now, we talked about a restaurant. We talked about Uber for cats because it was, I don't know what. Some people are going to say, that's great. I can see how these small purchases that are basically retail purchases, I can see how you can test that really quickly. But B2B stuff, the buying cycles are really long and the implementation cycles are really long. How can I possibly apply lean in a more enterprise environment?
Right. So the first thing to realize is that when we talk about experiment, people often think it's around the product. So I have to go and build things. And if I was doing something with food or I was doing something in B2C, I could build things faster. But enterprise software itself might take 3 months to build. And even then, that's like a very fast track.
Right.
But the thing to realize is that the first task with any product, whether it's B2C or B2B, is kind of the acquisition step. You have to basically go from somebody knowing nothing about your product to saying, I want this. And that call to action is all we're really measuring for. So in the B2B sense, the sales process becomes the first product. It's not even the product itself, but rather there are simple things like, I've had entrepreneurs come to some boot camps that I've run and they'll say we're building this great, game-changing enterprise software. I'm like, that's great. Have you ever sold to the enterprise before? Never. But we have this perfect solution because their software just, is bulky and it's a dinosaur. We just have a better solution. So we're like, okay, you're going to have to. It's a face-to-face selling approach. So let's just run these problem interviews or solution interviews. Let's set up these calls. And so we set aside 2 weeks to say, let's go and call. We make a target list of some companies they can call on. And when they come back after 2 weeks and have made 0 calls or have made 1 or 2 calls that went nowhere, that's a big red flag.
Right.
So to me, those are the types of things we experiment on. Is can you get in front of the enterprise customer? Can you articulate a problem that they are trying to solve? Because if not, then you go into pitch mode. And I know the context of this is kind of sales and what I have found. And so I came also from a technical background. Despised sales because I thought it was, selling and pitching and making people see things differently. And I've learned that it's not that at all. It's really about identifying known problems that are keeping people up at night and then putting solutions in front of them that are and the first phase that I talk about in the entrepreneurial journey for products is getting to problem solution fit.
Right.
So if you can identify a problem that is keeping someone up at night, like they have back pain, and you give them a mattress that is good for back pain, they'll be attracted to you like a magnet, and that makes life a lot easier. So when you think of it that way, the initial job is let's go uncover problems in the enterprise. And a lot of folks, again, will imagine solutions and start building that solution and try to sell it. And I find that, again, is backwards. You want to instead immerse yourself in a place where you can learn. So whether you become a consultant, whether you go and have these interviews, there are many ways that you can learn about the problem before actually going and trying to sell it.
Now, how many people do you need to talk to? Say we're on this enterprise track and say, okay, I've got to go make 10 calls. I make 10 calls. Do I need to make 10 calls? Do I need to make 100? Can I make 2?
Sure. So it depends on the challenge with the enterprise is it is a multi-actor process. So there are decision makers and influencers and people that have nothing to do with anything that you may talk to. And then there are the users of the actual thing that you're going to be selling. And so identifying all of those is challenging in the beginning. But if you identify them, like if you're talking to users, usually between 5 to 10 interviews, you start to get enough learning that you don't have to go any further. The answers begin to run into each other, and that's enough for you to go back and then do the next step.
So basically, I can predict what they're going to tell me accurately. Then I know
That's
that
right.
I've got it.
Yes, that is correct. And again, now when you're now in the beginning, you're not going to get that. So in the beginning, you're going to go and start talking to anyone in the enterprise. So you don't have to understand the players of it if you're not familiar with it. But the more the more defined the roles are, the more predictable the answers become.
Okay, that makes sense. So the narrower the segment, the more commonality there is in their worldview and their problems and what they need and so on. So let's suppose that we do that, and whether we've got 5 or 10 or 50 people that we need to talk to, because we might need to talk to 50 people to find the 5 with a common thread, right?
That's right.
Are there lean startup tricks to getting these interviews?
Yeah. So at a very high meta level, it's different it's the same whether you're trying to attract prospects in B2B or any other domain. And that is this thinking of customers like fish. So if you're going fishing, you don't just go to the river and throw in a bunch of bait and hope fish come to you. You have to understand which fish kind of breed in different parts of the river at different times of the year. Go to them. So the analogy here would be you have to understand where these customers hang out, what are the situations where these problems arise,
right?
And when do they start looking for potential solutions. So in the enterprise space, these might be events. People might go to certain types of events because there was a trigger maybe a week ago, maybe a month ago, maybe 3 months ago that caused them to start looking for a solution like Agile or something or Lean. And so you go to a conference and there are going to be people there who are trying to learn and look for a solution to a problem that they might have. So you have to understand, again, using that analogy, where people hang out, like fish, and then you have to also use the right bait to kind of attract them. And the best bait that you can get anyone with is a problem description. So in marketing, there's a term, the strategy of preeminence by Jonathan Abrams, which says that if you can describe a problem better than your prospect, they automatically assume you have a solution. And this applies even in the doctor's office. So when we go to a doctor's office and they start diagnosing us, it's really a trial and error process because doctors don't really know what's wrong with us. But if we go there with back pain and they start touching and feeling and eventually makes something hurt more and they say, oh, did that hurt more? And you say yes, and they start taking vigorous notes, we are going to assume that they have diagnosed this correctly and they have the solution to their problems. So much the same way when you go into so the best way to attract kind of a prospect is describing a problem that they have been thinking about and they want to talk to you about it because they have nothing to lose in those instances. Now, in other cases, if you're not sure what the problem is or you're not sure it's validated, the next best way is using that with a warm referral. So getting a friend or a LinkedIn contact to help pass on a message where you describe the overall kind of problem or value proposition very quickly without getting into solution. but also make it very clear. And this is the learning versus pitching kind of mindset. You're making it very clear that you're really exploring a potential area that might be of interest to them. And here's kind of the problem you're going after. And if that's of interest, you would appreciate, meeting them in a more casual environment. So you're not going and pitching them in their office. You're meeting them over lunch or coffee or at a trade show, taking 10 minutes aside and talking about a particular problem and how they might be solving that today.
We might even say, give them a glass of wine or two,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. So make it very, very casual and kind of non-pitch. So don't pull out your laptop and don't pull out, notes and start, or showing them demos because you're not ready for any of that stuff.
And something that I've noticed when I have been able to control myself on the technology side and just talk to people about their problems, people like to vent their frustrations. And they like to vent them, especially if they think there's some chance you might be able to solve them down the road.
Absolutely.
And so if you're coming in and pitching, they're going to put defenses up and not be fully open with you. But if you're coming in just saying, hey, I'd like to learn more about this space. I hear there's some frustrations and I don't have a solution, but just here's some wine and tell me more.
Yep.
You can't get them to stop half the time.
Absolutely. So one of the products I built was a photo sharing product, and I thought it'd be good. It might be used by professional photographers, and I'm not a photographer, so I had no idea how I'd reach them. But I did exactly what I told you. Is I wrote a short paragraph about the value proposition and kind of the problems. And so this was back when. So the problem was I knew wedding photographers take a lot of pictures, and they have to sift through a lot of things to get them online. And so we had a much faster way to get them, basically build their galleries and sell photos. Essentially, is what it was. But what I did is I looked here in Austin, found some people. I reached out to some friends, and they said, "Oh, I know some professional photographers." And so I used them to pass on this message over email, and said, I'm looking to solve. I'm an entrepreneur here in Austin, so you play the local card. So there's this affinity of both being in Austin. So find some common ground, but then say that I'm building this product and it will help you do this. This is not built yet. I don't even know if I'm going to build it. At this point, I'm just looking for advice. I'd like to understand if this is something that might be of interest to you.
Sure.
And these photographers invited me. I wanted to meet them over for coffee. They brought me into their studios. And as you described, I asked for 30 minutes. I was there for an hour and a half. In one case, I actually had to make an excuse and leave. Not because I wasn't getting valuable information, but because I was actually running late. Yeah. But people, if you kind of hit that problem on the head, they're more than happy to talk about the process, because here's someone who is trying to understand them and understand the problem. And even for them, it's a way for them to explore the problem even further. So there's a lot of benefit kind of both ways.
So I think something that I'm picking up from this is whether your network includes a lot of your target market, your extended network you should have a way to reach these people. And is it fair to say that if you just have no connection whatsoever to the people you're trying to help, maybe you should rethink who you're trying to help, or at least learn a little bit about who you're trying to help first?
So yes. I would say it's easier if you've got that warm introduction, that personal network. In other cases, it can be a longer shot, but again, once you understand who you're trying to reach, that's the more important thing, and where they might hang out. So another tactic that a lot of people will use are webinars. If you can get a webinar around a topic that people want to understand. So let's take something like IoT or blockchain. That's like a big trending thing.
Sure.
If I came up with 10 reasons why blockchain projects are going to fail in the next 3 years, that's one of those spicy headlines. It may attract attention. Now there needs to be content behind it. But I may do a webinar on kind of how do you think through blockchain, and I have to have credibility, and all those things have to be built up. But the point is that if you can build in kind of interesting content that is still hitting a problem that people are looking to understand more, you can attract people to a webinar, you can attract people to a talk, and those are all still ways of generating leads that can go deeper.
That's probably a better example than my Uber for Cats example, especially if you're trying to do something B2B, and the temptation is, if you're a techie and you're into blockchain, you're going to go build whatever you think the coolest thing is. But instead, all that time you spend complaining about why blockchain is not going to work, turn that into something, ask if anyone else is sharing those pain points, and ask whether they matter. Because sometimes you might be right about the problem, but the problem doesn't actually mean anything.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess the awareness of the problem is almost the first thing you have to validate. You may think it's a problem, but if it doesn't register in people's top 10 problems that they're going after, and there are tons of things people have very limited attention spans. If it doesn't register high on their list, it's going to be a hard process to build something and then sell them on it.
I think that's a great point, because you might say, well, number 8 on this list, everyone agrees it's a problem, but maybe no one cares or no one's willing to spend money on this particular aspect of it.
Right.
And then you can go build a solution to that, and it
Right.
may be perfect, but it won't get any traction.
Yeah. And so in those cases, it may actually be that you go down a path and give yourself some time, of course, so you don't want to go there indefinitely, but you may go down into a problem awareness building campaign. So you may start building content on exactly why, because people, again, gravitate towards solutions. Maybe everyone's doing blockchain, but it's actually a bad thing and there's something better, or something to be, maybe you are going to do something that's a more secure way of doing things, or whatever you want to add in there. But the point is that if people don't think that's a problem, you have to first build that awareness for the problem. And
Right.
if you can't turn that over, if you can't turn them to be aware of the problem, then again, your solution is not going to matter.
And so instead of investing a lot of time and energy and money in building your solution to blockchain problem number 8, you do a webinar, maybe you run some AdWords to promote it, or run something on Facebook to promote it, but you can do that really inexpensively and really quickly.
Right.
And then find out from those conversations whether you have a real problem on your hands.
Yes.
Now, I know that the answer is probably going to be it varies, but are there any rules of thumb for how long it should take to validate these ideas?
So it obviously will vary, but I often will always put an upper limit. And so I've been running these boot camps, and in the beginning I worked with a lot of startups, and then over time we have done these same boot camps with corporates, and so even big companies going after their customers in sometimes new markets. What I found is that there is kind of an average time of 8 weeks to be the magic number to get to problem solution fit.
Okay.
So when people come into these boot camps, there are some ground rules. Rule number 1, you can't build anything. So even if you have built, so there's no coding, no building of anything. Demos are fine, prototypes, landing pages, and some prototypes, if it's warranted, is fine, because it's an art to demo. You want to demo with as little as possible to tell a story. So we can get into that a bit more later. But that's the first ground rule: is there's no building of anything. If you build something, that's fine. You can say it's sunk cost. But you have this thing. We're going to take what you have and try to turn that. The job of the bootcamp is to build a customer. So how can we make a customer with what you have in 8 weeks or less? So I find 8 weeks to be the average time. When I've done this with kind of B2B corporates where they tend to go a bit slower, we have turned that into a quarter. So within a quarter, if you can get problem solution fit, then it's not that the idea is not going to work. It's just that either we need to understand why, because you should get through that within a quarter. And if you can't, then there's probably a reason why this idea shouldn't move forward. So the way that our value proposition for the bootcamp is within 8 weeks, and when we do it in a corporate, it's a quarter, but within 8 weeks to a quarter, you will know whether your idea is a go or no go with empirical evidence. So you will come back and say, we're going to move forward and get through the next funding gate, or get through the next milestone. Or you will come back and say, we are resetting this idea, and here's why. Not because we're giving up, but because we went and tested, and either there are dozens of solutions out there that are doing exactly what we do, we can't displace them, or there's no awareness of this problem and it would be too much to convince people to buy. So there'll be some reasons why you're going to kill an idea off. And so I find 8 weeks to be that magic number.
Okay. By the way, this wine is starting to taste quite good.
Yeah, it's quite good.
Now, you said something really interesting, which again, I think you might take for granted, but it really jumped out at me, which is we're not trying to make a product, we're trying to make a customer.
Yeah.
And I get the sense that there was a time when making a product was really hard. And if you had a product that was really unusual and impressive, and now anyone can make a product. And so that's the easy part. And you talked about de-risking the hard part. The hard part is making the customer, which is a phrase I had never thought of before. Tell me a little bit more about that. How do I know that I've made a customer? Did they pay me money in those 8 weeks?
So yes, in the ideal scenario, the way I describe the process is, and this is again just the funnel process. You go prospect leads, then you maybe have a trial, and then you get a paying customer. So the best validation is going from the beginning to that paid customer. Now 8 weeks is too long. So since we're not building anything, we are really trying to get kind of halfway through the process, which is people posturing to become a customer.
Okay.
So this is where they may give you advance payment or they may start a trial with you, but knowing the price, and that's a very important thing. So I find, again, back in the days, we would launch products and not worry about the price because we would think, we'll figure the business model later. And I find that again is a recipe for being surprised, when you are ready to charge, because price, changes perception of everything, even bottled water. And that's a perfect example I like to use. I can put 2 bottles of water here. One could be $3, one could be 10 cents, and ask you to pick one and buy one. And you will see that people will pick different ones depending on their perception of quality and whether the one is better than the other. And there's going to be a different customer segment that will go after the more expensive one and the cheaper one. So price is very much part of the product. So in these 8 weeks, we are building an offer. We're not even building a product. And the offer, to me, is made up of 3 things. It's the unique value proposition. So this is the thing that you do for the customer that is very specific. Like, I can help you find your dream job in 60 days, or I'll give you your money back. Okay. Now, that's a promise. And it's a pretty strong promise because I'm guaranteeing things and I'm giving you a time frame. So there are some formulas you can use to make that kind of a promise, but that's the value proposition. It attracts attention. Now, your next question is going to be, okay, that's interesting, but how will you do it? The next part of the offer is the demo. So I'm now going to show you something or tell you a story of how my solution is different from everything else out there and why this will actually work for you. Now, I don't have to build it. I just have to describe it. We were talking about Jason Cohen and WP Engine. He described WP Engine to me over lunch. He didn't have to show me anything. He's like, it's this premium WordPress hosting. It's going to stay up all the time. And he said, does your site go down? I'm like, yes. He's like, you fixed it? Yes. Does it cause you pain? I'm like, yes. And it's the worst time. That's when you've done a blog post and there's all this attention, and that's the worst time when it goes down. So he hit the problem on the head, and he's like, well, we're going to do this where we just have people and we just keep it up all the time. Are you interested? And so I was sold. And that's a simple demo. So it talks about a problem. It talks about a solution, and they fit. You've got a customer or a potential customer. And the last piece, of course, is the pricing. So my question to him is, well, how much is this going to cost me? And then he tells me, and then I do the math in my head, or he actually did some anchoring and told me how, I probably spend this much time on it, and, it's not worth my time. And so you do, if you kind of do the calculus in your head and it makes sense, then I say yes. And so at that point, that would be what we want to get out of the problem solution fit stage, is get people to see the offer, so unique value proposition, demo, and price, and say, yes, I'm in. Mm-hmm. And it's a binary thing. It's not maybe I'm in or I want to see something else. It's like I'm in. And to actually put skin in the game, you have to have a clear call to action. Mm-hmm. So the ideal would be advance payment. So I remember going up and signing, and they hadn't even launched yet, but I went on some early access list and I put my credit card information. They were not going to charge it right away, but just that act of going through the motions of saying, I want to become a customer are things you want to validate. So again, important to measure what customers do, not what they say they do, what they say they'll do.
Right. So am I willing to put my credit card in because this problem is important enough for me to solve that I would be very happy to do that? Or if it's not a credit card type purchase, will I sign some kind of agreement that I'll pay upon delivery of the results? Right.
And if you were in a bigger setting, and so because you brought up the B2B kind of the complex sale, that might be even starting a pilot where you've still talked about price, but maybe that's a paid pilot, or maybe it's there's nothing wrong with not charging from day one as long as it's very clear what the value will be in the future and what the payment will be. So you might do a 1 month or 3 month pilot with a large company. There, the proxy payment is their time invested. So the fact that they would actually go through this and want to vet it out is still an investment on their side, and you can use that again, not as good as getting payment, but it's still a proxy for a future payment.
But then they also know while they're going through that pilot what the price will be if everything works.
That's right.
And that's part of the important thing. You're not just doing the work of the product. you're not trying to make a product, you're trying to make a customer. And to make a customer, a price is involved.
Yes. Yes. And the other way I often describe this is that if you think of a business model does three things. We create value for our customers. We then deliver value to them. So the way we create value would be through the value proposition. So, if we can deliver this to you, is that valuable, and how valuable is it? The delivery of the value is how we actually deliver it. So that's where the lean MVP concept becomes very interesting. So in a B2B environment, I might deliver value through software, but I might say, well, the software is eventually going to give you these reports. What if I just become a consultant and just give you those reports? So how you deliver the value, we can play with that in the beginning. But then the last piece there is capturing value back. So this is a fancy way of saying getting paid. Now, those three things actually go in order. And that's the thing to keep in mind, is that you can't actually get paid until you deliver value, and you can't deliver value till you get the customer to say, I know what the value is that you are promising me to deliver. So we start in kind of that reverse order, which is, let me go to my prospect and make a promise and make it specific enough where they hire me. So hire me, I'm using not, it could be a consultant, it could be hire my firm to build a piece of software, whatever that is, they hire me for the job. And then you actually have to deliver that value. Now, once you can deliver the value, then you get paid and you get to keep that. Now, when we go into sales process, we sometimes ask for advance payment, but even there, if value isn't delivered, we often have to give the money back.
Right.
We should. So that's why I look at that is more a tactic to make sure there's skin in the game and people are going to be invested and motivated in seeing a solution through. But the logic of it still is you have to create value and then deliver that value, and then you get paid. And it's always that with everything out, with every business out there.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So suppose that we have restrained our engineering, if I build it, they will come attitude, and we've validated the concept, and then we've got into one of these pilots. What I see from people time and time again, and I've been guilty of this myself as well, is, okay, great, now I finally get to build something, I get to write some code, I need to make sure this is all scalable, and blah, 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 blah. And there's like all this stuff as if you're the next Facebook.
Right.
When, in fact, you've got a pilot. What should people be thinking about it? Are there examples you can give of how people have handled this cleverly in a way that sort of does literally the minimum viable solution?
Yeah. So, there's the concept of minimum viable product, but I even go like much further. So in the second book that you mentioned in the beginning, Scaling Lean, I actually talk about giving yourself permission to scale in stages. So and I even talk about this 10x model. So the first thing that everyone should think about is, how do I get customer one? Not
right.
Customer 1,000, customer one. I call that the singularity moment of a product. So that's when you go from nothing to creating value for someone.
Right.
And that is when you bring out the wine, bring out the champagne and celebrate. And most people kind of take it like one is just, boring. But that's a very magical moment. Your next job becomes, how do I go from 1 to 10? Mm-hmm. Because then you start actually working on this. Because one could really be a friend. It could be a warm lead, warm contact. So you have to make sure that's repeatable. So still celebrate it and make sure it's repeatable, mm-hmm. and that becomes the next thing. When you have to make 10 sales in a row, that's much harder. But if you can get 10, then you go to 100, and at that point you start thinking of not scaling again to let me go get a sales force, but you may say, let me start to think of the sales process and mm-hmm. maybe even hire a salesperson to get to 100, because I can't sell 100 people right. on my own. So that would be the mindset that I have people think about. Now, if you look at examples, there are so many out there. I brought up Tesla in the beginning. Tesla could have gone the route of saying, we want to, forget this, roadster kind of premium car. We want to build an electric car for the masses. Let's build this battery and stick it in a Kia and let's announce it and let's, get lots of sales. And they could have done that when they started, and they probably would have gotten a lot of sales, but then they would have to deliver as well. They would have to kind of get the factories going. They'd have to get the charging infrastructure. And that would be a lot for them to take on, especially given that their brand wasn't solid yet. So mm-hmm. Elon Musk came from PayPal, not from the car industry people. And so there were a lot of risks with that. And so he came out with this strategy, this 3-stage approach of giving himself permission, not because they didn't have the resources, but it was a much smarter way to kind of manage them, to say, let's actually sell a very expensive car that would limit the number of cars we have to make, because not many people can buy mm-hmm. them. The people who buy them have other cars in the garage because it's a very expensive car. So it's not a primary vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd be an early adopter. So
Right.
all of those went into consideration. So that's one example. Facebook went through the same scenario when they launched. They could have launched to everyone, like all the social networks out there, but out of constraints of money in the beginning. So Mark Zuckerberg was a college student, couldn't get funding because there were lots of other social networks out there with millions of users. So he did this small thing in Harvard, and then he did it in 3 other schools. But by then he could show the metrics, and they were very impressive. And he raised a lot of money. But even then, they kept going school by school because that was an approach they used to not worry about. Even Facebook didn't have to worry about scaling to Facebook scale deliberately because they knew that would be probably a big mistake. Friendster and all the others, their servers were crashing every
Mm-hmm.
week because they just couldn't keep up with all the free users out there. And so by managing your growth, you actually can take control of supply and demand. And unlike most people are afraid that when they go too slow, competition will come in. But all these stories I'm describing, they all kind of reached a scale and didn't really have that happen to them because they were listening to their customers and they were really outpacing them all the way through and building something better. And so you can actually take your time. Of course, you can't be too slow. So they were going as fast, but they were going as fast in a managed growth manner to allow that to happen.
Well, I think the other thing is they were very focused
Yeah.
on their growth, right? Tesla started out with $100,000 and something Roadster. They weren't trying to make a family car. And so
Yes.
they were very focused on that. And Facebook, like you say, they weren't going after all 7 billion people. They were going after a very select few, and it let them really focus their energies. And I think this is another challenge people have when they start. They say, okay, well, we've got this problem and we've got a product, and it applies to a gazillion
Exactly.
people
Yep.
who have different personas and different needs and so on. And so, well, then where do you focus? Instead of picking the best fit or the fit that delivers the right product market fit up at the beginning.
Yeah, so the way I like to describe it is if you try to market to everyone, you end up marketing to no one. You have a message that just is too watered down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time, there is the local maxima trap. So if you just focus on one and you ignore all the others, well, what if one of those others was actually, a 2x or a 10x business than the one you did?
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, you do want to cast a wider net, but the way you do it is not by watering down the message. So if you have a message and say, this is for everyone, and then hope they will come and say, I'm really your early adopter, I'm
Right.
your best customer, that's not going to happen. So what you want to instead do is take your idea and then create a set of variants. So create like your top 3 or 5 customer segments, and for each of them go narrow, and for each of them run these offer tests, whether they're online or offline, through interviews or landing pages, through webinars, or all those other tactics. But you begin to run them, and much like we talk about in Lean, we talk about A/B testing. So we A/B test things. You're
Mm-hmm.
A/B testing your value proposition in that case, and you double down on the one that actually kind of comes in the strongest.
Okay. So you might say, I'm picking this customer segment for now.
Yeah.
And then if I saturate it or I end up being really successful and have more resources, I can go back to number 2 and number 3 and whatever as needed.
Sometimes even in parallel. So that photo sharing example, I literally took the same exact concept and I went to wedding photographers, professional photographers, and I also went on the B2C side. I went to moms with kids
Mm-hmm.
because I realized that both of them have lots of pictures. Both
Okay.
of them had these problems. While the photographers would pay me more, there are a lot of moms out there.
Right.
So it was like, the business model could end up in the same, big zeros at the end. And so I pursued both simultaneously up to even when I built the product. So when I had the minimum viable product, I gave them the same exact product. One I called Cloudfire, that was the name of the product. That was for the B2C. The other was Cloudfire Pro. But
Mm-hmm.
on day one, it was identical.
Mhm.
The only difference was the price.
Okay.
And it sounds really weird, but over time they started to diverge because the photographers, they looked at it and they said they want more features, and so we began to add things that were pro features.
Mm-hmm.
But on day one, they were the exact same thing. And so some of this kind of validating can be done in parallel. You don't even have to saturate a market.
Okay.
You're really trying to split test and can actually be done in parallel. And the way that it sounds like a lot of work, but the way that you can do it is because in the beginning, when you're not building, your biggest waste, the biggest place where you spend time is waiting. You're waiting for these conversations, you're waiting for these meetings. And so in a given day, I could talk to a mom and I could also talk to a photographer.
Right.
I didn't have to say I just talked to photographers for the next 2 weeks. So there are ways that you can do these in parallel.
Well, and you also, again, I think you're burying the lead for some people here, which is you have the same product, one just has Pro at the end.
Yes.
So you only built one thing. You didn't add the Pro features at the beginning.
Right.
And it kind of reminds me of a talk Josh Baer gave about how they were trying to figure out, they had sort of established a beachhead in a market and they were trying to go after some other markets, some more premium features. So they put them in the product, if you will, by having a button that would do whatever that feature was. Except if you click the button, it said, oh, feature isn't implemented yet.
Yeah.
But they could tell some buttons got clicked on a whole bunch,
right.
and they would go build those features. Some never got touched.
Yep.
And so I thought, well, we thought that was a cool idea, but it's not.
Right.
And I thought that was a great experiment to run. It was not something that would even occur to me to put a button in that doesn't actually do anything. Like, who would think of that? But it is, I don't think you should do it and act like you have something that you don't. But I think most people are understanding that you have limited resources and you're trying to do the best you can for your customers with those limited resources.
Yeah, but it again goes back to the principle of everything, which is whenever you put anything new out there, almost the first part of this customer journey is the acquisition step. And when I say acquisition, it's taking somebody who was unaware of this thing existing, and all of a sudden they see it, and do they act on it or not? So the button's a great example, which is, it could be a promise for something. You click this button and we make cat sitting work. But so it's a button that promises something, and do people actually even click it? Are people even interested in clicking it?
Right.
And if you can get validation, if enough people are interested, then you take it to the next level. And if people aren't interested, then you go find the next thing that could actually work. And
that doesn't even have to be in a product, right? This could just be on a landing page.
Sure.
Right? Like, download our paper about the 10 problems with blockchain.
Yeah.
And if you spend a little bit of money, you drive 1,000 people there and no one clicks on that button, you probably you've either mistargeted your audience or you don't have a problem that they care about. In either case, you need to fix something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, what have you seen? Do you have any stories where people have the light bulb has come on and they've kind of gone from being whatever the opposite of lean is to actually getting lean?
Yeah, so I've kind of been privileged over the last few years. I had no master plan of doing this. I kind of stumbled into it, but I was an entrepreneur, began writing, then thought I would write a book, but I didn't know how to write a book, so I decided I would do some workshops first. And so through the workshops, and those workshops became boot camps, I really got to expose myself. And so I got like a MBA on entrepreneurship in a very, very rapid manner. So you can only learn so much on your own products, but by proxy, I learned a lot from others. So yes, in that process, I see a lot of transformations happening. So one of the extreme examples we've had is somebody working on an idea for 4 years, walking into this boot camp saying, I'm just stuck. And they're still like in building. I mean, they've gone through like this big vision, but they've gone through 3 different solutions. And this is like build it all the way, not work, and then build another one and build another one. So 4 years of that. And, no customers or very few customers, but no real traction. And so they go through the boot camp, and it was again the ground rules. Stop building. Let's take your best features. Imagine yourself in an elevator ride, not with an investor, but with your best customer. What demo do you give them? So you've got all this stuff built. You only have 30 seconds. What would you show them? So let's just start with that. And so we turned that into an offer. So like, what would you tell them that gets their attention? So the value proposition. Show me the demo. And then he went out and he began like giving that demo to people, and got people to actually look at it. But he came back 4 weeks later and said, I'm killing the idea. And I asked him why, and he had a very clear reason why. So that's the part that I mentioned earlier, is that there's nothing wrong with resetting an idea if you know it's not going to work because you have empirical evidence. In his case, this problem was just not monetizable. It was an interesting problem, but it was just not monetizable. Like, people would not pay money to get this solved. And he came back with a very clear, he tried different prices. And so before, he was not even doing any of that testing. He was just looking to say, let me build the most elegant possible solution to this problem and put it out there. And people will love it, and then they'll eventually pay me. And we flipped that around and said, no, let's go and demo it and get people. And people were interested in the solution. They're like, wow, this is interesting. Now, will you pay money? No, I won't pay money.
And I think some of this goes back to the mindset of, if I build it, they will come. And then if I build it, it's almost like you're scared that people are going to tell you no, right? Whether we want to admit that or not. And so why not get all that out of the way at the beginning if they're going to tell you no?
Right.
Figure out what they're going to say yes to. I don't think most entrepreneurs don't mind working hard, but there's few things more frustrating than working hard for something that isn't meaningful.
So, and again, it's one of those things where, we can sit here and some of your listeners are going to just roll their eyes and say, that's not me. That's the probability bias with all of this. And I used to be that way. So I get emails even to this day saying, I wish I read your book 5 years ago.
Right.
And I reply and say, me too, because I was doing all the same mistakes. But now I've gotten to a point, and again, I touched on this a little bit early on, but one of my personal mantras became, life's too short to build something nobody wants, because I built way too many products that were awesome to me when I started, right. And they still were. I still love those products, but they just weren't awesome for enough people to make it into a business for many reasons. And I can even point to the reasons now because I know what they were. But I never, and so now what I do is the whole process here, when you asked about lean, is it's starting with the riskiest things first, mm-hmm. and then going to the easy stuff, which is what we do with products. If you were building a house, we don't start building up the walls, we first build the foundation. Mm-hmm. So we have to do the same thing here, understand what is riskiest about your business. And as I've gone around and talked to even the most successful entrepreneurs, I used to think entrepreneurship was a very risky venture. People are, to be an entrepreneur, you would be the one who would jump off a plane, without a parachute, and then figure out how to make it to the ground. And I've actually found that not to be the case there are people like that, but I found the majority of the entrepreneurs are actually very risk averse, and they do what you described, which is, let me take my idea and let me de-risk the downside as quickly as possible.
I think that's what you described. I don't know if I could take credit for describing it that way.
I guess what you were talking about is removing the risk, early.
Right.
But it's the same thing. I mean, it's the same thing that happens if you go to hedge fund managers in Wall Street. Rule number one is don't lose money, and rule number two is look at rule number one.
Right.
So they make sure that in any deal they go into, their downside is covered. A lot of the more savvy entrepreneurs, Richard Branson, good example, when he started Virgin Airlines, negotiated with Boeing. There was a term in the agreement where he could give them back the planes if the airline failed. And so this was a way for him not to be stuck with these really expensive fleet of airplanes if the airline didn't work. And so it's always about protecting your downside. And so I think if you think of it from that way, everyone invests in their business. And this is another thing that I think most people underappreciate is sweat equity. Mm-hmm. So everyone invests in their business, but they say, well, I'm not investing like an investor. I'm only putting in sweat equity. Well, time is more valuable than money, because money can go up and down. Time only moves in one direction.
Right.
So that's why I go back to that life's too short to build something nobody wants. And now when I look at ideas, I actually am the first person to want to invalidate it, because if this is not a good idea, I don't want to waste my time on it. I want to go to the next one or the one after that.
Right. In theory, you can always make more money, but you can't just magically go pull more time out. Now, you said something else that I thought was very interesting, and I think it's something else that especially folks with an engineering background have a hard time with. And some of it, I think, is like you said at the beginning, the world is different than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if you were moderately successful, you had scalability problems from the get-go. Even if you're selling one thing to the enterprise, one customer, if your product didn't scale, if it wasn't optimized right, it wouldn't work. Now, you can basically throw something in the cloud and it doesn't really matter. Like for any reasonably foreseeable scenario, you're going to be okay. But scaling sales is a whole other story. And this is where de-risking the idea, I think, comes really into play, and having the entrepreneur think about what they're delivering is not just whether it's code or it's a physical product or whatever the thing is they think they're selling. Their whole engine that they need to engineer is actually the whole customer acquisition, retention, referral process. How do you help people break out of that product box into that larger view of the universe?
I guess all these things we're talking about, some of it comes with experience. I find some of it, people kind of jump into just logically understanding the world is different. Just kind of seeing that, because again, as you say, with cloud computing and with just all the tech out there. I remember when I was coding, I was doing C first, then C++,
Right.
and then Java, and those were very hard languages.
Yep.
And I look at the kids these days, and their life is easy. Like they're like scratching things, and they're like
They don't even know what a null pointer reference is.
And my son is programming robots with just Lego Mindstorm,
Right.
Dragging things around. I actually had version 1 of Lego Mindstorm, and I still wrote some C code there.
Okay.
So that's just an example of how the world has changed. So again, it's less about, can we build cool stuff, and more about, I think the way you described it, which I know you were coding the making customer thing, but I think ultimately that is what the new product is can we actually make customers, and can we actually make them at scale?
Right.
And to do that, you have to think of the customer journey. You have to think of those 5 metrics you talked about: acquisition, activation, revenue, retention, the missing one. Revenue, retention, and referral. There you go. So you have to think of those things, and you have to think about how can we engineer the product in the beginning to give yourself permission to scale, to make this, I call it a customer factory, to make this customer factory work at small scale. So we get dozens of customers through this, and we don't need scalable servers for that. We don't need, because we can count our customers on fingers and toes. We don't need complex analytics for that. We can just go talk to them.
Right.
So those are all the things you want to give yourself permission to do. But as you solve for that, as you start to give yourself kind of the room to level up, that's when you start to incrementally invest and scale. And I find that to be a more manageable strategy than just trying to go to scale day one, which is often trying to do everything all at once, and you end up doing nothing all that well.
And not doing anything, potentially doing things that don't matter.
Right.
As well. And missing out on the things that really do, that are actually involved getting the next 100 or however many customers in the door.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the things I try to work on with my customers, who tend to be oftentimes technical people, or they're experts in something, and I say, okay, you have a technical problem, whether it's truly technical or it's just a business problem or legal problem or whatever, you need to think about the business problem that surrounds that for the customer.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, you're going to be able to sell much better than someone who just looks at the technical problem. But then the next step is, if you have a whole set of those business problems that you're solving for your customer, you need to be able to process that in a more and more scalable way.
Yes.
But don't act like you need to do 1 million of them on day one, because you don't.
You don't. Yes. And so I get that. So I often will get a question of, does this apply to services, and if it does, how? And that's a classic example of that, where a lot of services businesses tend to do non-repeatable work. I mean, they leverage a little bit, but there's not much reuse between them. But they want to grow their business,
Mm-hmm.
and so they begin to hire people. But that can only scale linear at best, but
Right.
not even that after a while, because the more people you add, just the more overhead there is. And so if you really are trying to 10x your business, which is where this 10x model comes from, you almost have to start thinking differently. So you may have to look at your services, and you start to look at productizing them or automating them, or partnering on other things, or really going like niche and narrow. Look at your customers and say, these 20% are the ones who have hired us the most, but not just for one thing. They've hired us for 2 or 3 different things.
Right.
So let's actually turn that into kind of an offering.
Right.
You hire this and then that, and then go after just those types of people. So there are all kinds of things you can do, but it goes to this mindset of saying, let's think in non-linearly. When we start thinking just linearly, we get it. So if you start to think at scale day one, that's a challenge, because you're tackling everything all at once.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go the other extreme and say, let me just grow linearly, or kind of look at just doubling doubling my business, that too is not the right approach. So you want to give yourself enough time to say, I'm going to start slow. And it's just, essentially, this is just mirroring the hockey stick curve, which
Mm-hmm.
is what a lot of hyper growth businesses, follow. Not everyone's going to grow forever, like Facebook, which they too will stagnate at some point, because there are only so many humans on the planet till AI comes around. But every business stagnates. But the point is that in the beginning, you want to give yourself permission to grow rather rapidly, but in a controlled manner.
Mm-hmm.
So start from the 1s and 10s and go to the 100s, and maybe that's enough for your customer segment. But if it isn't, then you still challenge yourself to grow in these 10x types of mindsets, not just double what I have today.
Right. And I think you raised an interesting point with the services businesses. most people do feel like, oh, if I'm going to grow, I need to hire. If I'm going to double, I need twice as many people and twice as many projects.
Right.
But you may be 5 times as good as you were when you started, but you're still only charging the same thing, and you're still billing hourly. And so you've inherently put a mindset of limitation on your own business. It doesn't have to be that way. Going back to the lean model, the customer is paying you for a result at the end of the day that you're hopefully delivering and delivering better and better.
Right.
Doesn't have to necessarily mean that it takes the same number of hours. You could have automated that, and maybe you can do what took 200 hours, now it takes 20. You don't want to do that for 1/10 the price.
That's right. Or you go kind of upstream. So you may automate certainly, and this is something we do to some extent in our business. Is when I first started, I talked about the workshops and the boot camps. But fast forward today, we are taking a lot of that learning and we've been putting it into a software package. So that, in a way, is a way for us to automate all the learning. And now when I do go and talk to clients, or I do workshops or consulting, it's at a much higher price because everyone's kind of learned the basics and they're paid to learn the basics. But that's the scalable way to get that knowledge out there. And you can then kind of charge a lot more for people who get to the more advanced stage of the process.
So people can go to your website. We'll put that in the show notes. They can read a whole bunch of stuff on your blog. They can buy your book for $15, and then they can go to the next step if they want to. And so you're dealing with people at that highest level of value.
Yes, that's right.
All right. Anything else that people should take away from Lean?
So one thing that
other than buy your books.
So I guess one thing, and this is a new mantra. I talked about life's too short. That's what got me started. That's the catalyst that got me started. But the other one is love the problem, not your solution.
Right.
And I think it's worth touching on. And throughout, we've been talking about, I've been highlighting problem over solution, but I just feel it is so core that I want to bring it back at the end here. And that is that if you look at entrepreneurship, we pay a lot of credit to being having grit and having a lot of perseverance with and determination, but it's usually around a solution.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually around, I've got this idea, but it's really a solution I want to build, so I need to get the right team, the right investors, and that's a backwards approach, because if you think about it, building a solution is like building a key to which you don't quite know whether there's a door or not. And so we then take this key and we try to open a bunch of doors, and imagine that, imagine just, I give you a key and say, well, go find what door that opens. Sounds bizarre, but that's pretty much what we're doing. But if you flip that around and say, let's actually start kind of in the opposite way. Let's actually either pick a customer or pick a big problem worth solving, and really understand it. Then the key building becomes actually easy. And then we can actually experiment with different keys and actually open doors that take us places. So I've summarized like my whole 5 or 6 years that I've been doing this, all the things that I've talked about with that one code: love the problem, not your solution. It kind of starts with in the earlier stages, as entrepreneurs get hit with ideas what they think of solutions. But even once you launch your products and you start getting customers have the same problem. Mm-hmm. They'll ask for feature requests, but they're really solutions, not problems. Mm-hmm. They'll say, go build this thing. And when you build it, they don't want it anymore because they never quite understood what they wanted.
Right.
They couldn't articulate the problem. So even in those instances, you have to dig deeper. Whenever we get feature requests, if we don't understand why the customer, how they would use it, we just do a reverse call. We just say, hey, you asked for this thing. Imagine you have this, here's a demo or here's a thing. What would you do next with it?
Right.
And we just try to understand the context.
I love that. Love the problem, not the solution. I love the door and key analogy. And I think something that I've learned the hard way, unfortunately, is not only does this make the engineering easier and it makes the business easier, it makes your life better, because we all want to feel like we're helping people at the end of the day.
Right.
Aside from the financials of it, if you're not doing something that actually helps someone, especially when you run into problems, it's hard to power through. It gets depressing. But if you feel like, I've got to knock this door down for these people, it's really important, you're going to find a way through that door, yep. Whether it's a key or a battering ram or whatever it might be.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Ash, thanks so much. Cheers. It's been a great pleasure.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure being on. Thank you.